It's obvious that we've come a long way to reach this point. For years, generation after generation, we've been trying, and today we're on the verge of success, on the verge of achieving victory. Our long wait is about to bear fruit. The last time when I visited the King of Jordan, he asked, "Why are you in such a hurry, and why do you insist so much? And you should be patient." I said, "We've been waiting for 2,000 years. Do you still believe that we are impatient? We might not remember all the 2,000 years, but at least I, for one, can talk about the hardships and efforts me and my parents went through." I asked Abdullah, "Do you remember all the days and seconds of the Nabateans? Do you remember all their sufferings after the arrival of the Romans?" "No, but it's obvious that you and Faisal, who want to establish a government in Jordan and Iraq today, remember your father's efforts. Even if Sharif Hussein had not passed away in 1931, he could have talked about the dream that had been kept alive for 77 years to pass it on to you." It was these growing sufferings that led Herzl to request the establishment of a home for Jews, and only a year before I was born, the first World Jewish Congress was formed in Basel, Switzerland. The first candle was lit, and it was supposed to shine light to the dark corner of the world. I was less than 9 years old. I mean, it was in 1906 when my parents and Sheena and Zipka, the other two daughters of the family, arrived in the United States. Sheena was 17 years old and Zipka was 4 years younger than me. The US was a place that seemed to be the promised land for the whole world. My dad had gone to New York a year earlier, and we spent that year in Belarus. In 1906, we decided to join my dad in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At that time, the second wave of immigration to Palestine, the Promised Land, had begun. My father did not want to experience another displacement. Many of our fellow Jews tried to persuade him to go to Palestine instead of the US. But there was still no government and law in that land. The Ottoman Empire was getting weaker day by day. Herzl met with Abdullah Hamid II, the Ottoman Sultan, and asked him for land to build a Jewish house. But the Ottoman king told Herzl that the Jews can keep their money for themselves, and he won't give any part of his empire, even if he's torn to pieces. It was about that time when nearly 25,000 Jews moved to Palestine, the venue of divine religions. As they didn't have any land or work, those men and women had gone to that land without a governor in the hope of finding the promised land. It's obvious that Jews had nowhere to go. My father was not optimistic about the wave of migration of the fellow Jews to Palestine, the burial place of Prophet Abraham. According to reports, until 1911, nearly 20,000 more immigrated to Palestine. They comprised about 7% of the people living in that land. But what's the point? Our fellow Jews, driven from everywhere, possessed only 3% of the land in Palestine, the cradle of prophets and religions. According to my father, it meant we were not accepted in that land either. But for my father's little Golda, who has now learned some literacy in addition to working and could read newspaper clippings and news, the situation had a different meaning. A year later, in 1912, when I was about 14 years old, I ran away from my father's house in the US and went to another part of the country. Have you ever had a dream to try hard in order to achieve it? It's obvious that leaving a humble house in the US for a girl from Kiev at the age of 14 is like jumping into hardships. At first, I got a train ticket to Denver, Colorado, and went to the house where Sheena and her husband, Mr. Korngold, were living. In that house, we spent many evenings for our gatherings and discussions. That was the place that formed an important part of my future, where I met the designer Morris Meyerson, the person who later became my first love, and we even got married. Yes, I went to Denver so I could study faster and understand things faster. So it didn't take long for me to find the definitive path of my life. It only took 3 years for me to realize that I wanted to become a teacher. I was still a teenager and I was considered an unofficial member. But I found the continuation of my dream in a group that might be the first Jewish Labor Party. In those days, I didn't even think that one day I would tell the Jordanian king face to face that we've been running and falling down and waiting for 2,000 years. But that unofficial membership in the Labor Party was the beginning of my efforts with love. We did a lot of things in that party. Back then, I was thinking exactly like the great Austrian journalist Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Jewish Agency and the mastermind of the Jewish State Manifesto. Herzl and his book For Zionism for Traditional Jews is just like Judah Hanasi and his book Mishnah, the first section of the Talmud. In whatever society we were in, we tried with complete sincerity to integrate with that society in our social life and harmonize with them, and at the same time preserve the faith of our ancestors, but we were not allowed. Over the next 2 years, about 20,000 more Jews immigrated to Palestine under the Ottoman Empire, and unfortunately, it's obvious that they still did not benefit from the lands and were considered guests. The unrecognized Jews, while living on the outskirts of Arab cities, continued to own cities and choose names for their cities, but only in their dreams. For example, in 1909, Nahum Sokolow used the name Tel Aviv instead of the Promised Land in his translation of Herzl's book. It meant the Spring Hill. For our dreams to come true, maybe we had to start with naming those dreams. In all those years of displacement, we dreamed about a land that could be called homeland. The population of the Jews that comprised 8% of the total population was one of the factors that helped England seriously intervene in Ottoman affairs at the end of the First World War. Taking advantage of the Ottomans' weakness, Britain divided the Levant into the countries of Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria. May God bless the soul of Churchill. He was the secret actor of that complicated story, and one of the few good children of Jesus of Nazareth. He spoke hundreds of times about Britain's commitment to the Jews and the establishment of a Jewish state. He negotiated with Palestinian representatives many times and did not back down even an inch. The Sykes-Picot Agreement in the 1919 Paris peace negotiations set the stage for the establishment of a state for the Jews. However, Archibald Wavell, an officer under General Allenby's orders, sarcastically said the World War, which was supposed to be the war to end war, probably this peace will also be the peace to end peace. But 2 weeks before the beginning of the Paris Peace Conference, the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement was signed. The agreement was one of the 2 documents that the Zionist delegation used in the Paris Peace Conference, and they believed that the Zionists' plans for Palestine, the land of Calvary, and the crucified prophet had already been approved by the Arabs. It is obvious that you have to be a little smart. The agreement was presented in English to Faisal in his room at the Carlton Hotel in London on January the 3rd, 1919. However, Faisal could not read it, and its contents were explained to him by Lawrence, the only translator there. Faisal signed the document at that meeting without consulting his advisors, who were waiting for him in a separate room. Although he added a note in Arabic next to his signature, conditioning the agreement on considering Palestine as an independent Arab region, but the Zionist organization presented the agreement to the Paris Peace Conference without any notes or conditions. In order to preserve the unity of all the displaced Jews, a little lie or two would not breach morality. Five new territories. Each of them were granted to one of the superpowers, and Palestine was Britain's share. Britain's protectorate on the land caused a new wave of immigration to Palestine, the venue of the Exodus. The Jews moved to Arab cities, well, because the villages wouldn't accept them. The Jewish settlements were gradually being formed. The support of wealthy Jews along with the military forces of Britain expedited things for the Jews. Put yourself in my place. With the formation of the new wave of immigration, could the young and inspirational Golda Mabovich get rid of the temptation of migrating to a land that had striking resemblance to the Promised Land? Of course, I shouldn't have let go of my eternal dream amid the hardships. I should have ascended with the kite in the plane and followed my religious dreams. Two years later, in 1921, at the age of 23, that enthusiastic and young teacher left the Jewish Labor Party in the U.S. and moved to Palestine, the birthplace of Abraham's descendants, in the hope of fulfilling her ancient dream. During the peak of communism, Jewish communities were also being formed in the occupied territories. The first kibbutz were formed by the efforts of the Jews 10 years before I immigrated to Palestine. These socialist villages were the ideal model of peaceful and blissful life in those days. Everyone was working and everyone was getting the benefit. Everyone as much as possible. I moved to a kibbutz and started a new life there. The government was in control of Britain, and the Arabs expressed their protests to them more and more, but they wouldn't get any results. Maybe it was for this reason that the first sparks of Arab militia groups were seen in Palestine, the last place Jesus lived in. In 1920, they launched the Nebi Musa riots, as if they wanted to say that our prophet is their prophet as well. But was it possible not to show any reaction in the face of the widespread protest? It was in those years when Haganah was formed, a group whose name for me is synonymous with a great man named Ben-Gurion. Haganah initially replaced the Hashomer organization to be the Jewish police in the lands under the British protectorate and act against the growing Arab movements. But gradually, it grew taller and reached a more significant position. Obviously, I didn't want to remain just a socialist teacher and cook. So I became a member of the Haganah as well. Between 1920 and 1923, I was a cook and teacher. I thought by joining the Haganah, I would also defend the safety of my cherished kibbutz. But could the communal village of Golda and her friends see itself excluded from the rest of the Jews who were exposed to dangers? At the same time, when the daughter of the Mabovich family was looking at her family photos, realized that the dispersion of Jews was still the Achilles heel for their survival. Maybe they could all be gathered in Palestine, the property of Saint Mary. But how many people could be housed in our kibbutz? Many Jews in Europe were still living in suffering, just like my sister and parents. I thought a place should be provided to invite all the afflicted Jews. Those years, things had changed. Idealistic Jews were coming to Palestine, the heavenly land, not only from Russia and Eastern Europe, but also from Germany and the US. It was obvious that the influx of incoming people to Palestine, the Canaan of endless romances, was so massive that the Arabs did their best to stop the fourth wave of immigration with civil wars. What happened in 1929 and was called the Al-Buraq uprising and bloodshed culminated near the Wailing Wall. Next to the only remaining wall of Hamikdash Harishon, the first holy place built by Prophet Solomon, the place where Muslims claim their prophet ascended to heaven from there, and the Qibla of their prayers was initially there. They say this is the only open path to heaven, and both Christ and Muhammad ascended to heaven through that way. In the farthest mosque, The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was built on the Temple of Solomon and next to the Dome of the Rock, the place of worshiping God, was drowned in blood. Among the Arabs, Izz-ad-Din al-Ghassam had started strange and complicated establishment. Small groups of 5 people plus a leader. None of the fighters knew each other. They only knew the leader of the group and Izz-ad-Din. A wonderful cycle of intelligence and operations. He had started organizing and ideologically deepening his forces since many years ago. But in 1934, they made their military actions public in the mountainous areas of northern Palestine. Actually, they were giving us a hard time.